Hey there, guys. Alrighty, today we are back with some more BlueJay, and this time we are hitting up history's worst Olympic marathon in a nutshell. I think he's talking about 1904. Before we dive in, make sure you go and hit. Ugh. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. I've got nothing to say. Like, if this is what I'm thinking, it's the one. Is the one? Is the Olympics? Then I know it's pretty fucking bad and it's fucking funny. So, is this the one where like I think a shit ton of people like only like is this the one where the dude who got lost and like completely went off track or whatever ended up winning? That's the one I'm thinking of in my head, or at least the story that I'm remembering. Let's find out.
With roots spanning 2,800 years to ancient Greece, the Olympics have become the pinnacle of athletic achievement, with the awarding of a gold medal being seen as internationally equivalent to winning a Nobel Prize, Pulitzer Prize, or my parents' approval. The world's best.
Well, one of those is impossible. And then the others are the Pulitzer Prize, the Nobel Prize, and an Olympic medal. Best sprinter, best pointy stick thrower, best. Let me tell y'all. High school track. I did track in high school before I got injured. Yeah. Being a sprinter was fantastic because I just had a crush on like every other female sprint on the female sprint. Like I don't know, like maybe volleyball is the only other sport where like you walk in and you're like, damn, everyone here of the gender that I am attracted to is smoking, right? I think volleyball, number one. Number two, track and field, specifically the sprints.
From all walks of life meet to prove their excellence in humanity's greatest cities. Athens, Paris, St. Louis. Yep, the third Olympic Games and America's first outing as host took place in St. Louis in 1904.
Dude, St. Louis is shithole. Like, it's probably the one of the worst. I would probably put it maybe top 10 worst cities to host the Olympics in the United States. I'd maybe even go so far as to say top 5.
But early 20th century St. Louis doesn't quite have the sex appeal of Athens or Paris, so how does one spice it up a bit? That's right, rat poison, brandy, and human experimentation.
Huh? The Olympic horse relay isn't ancient. It was started by the... Oh. Oh.
Originally, the 1904 Games were to be held in Chicago, but that same year, the World's Fair was celebrating the centennial of the Louisiana Purchase in St. Louis. What would be the world's largest fair to date had fascinating exhibits like the first ever x-ray machine, the radio phone, and all your favorite different looking people on display. Remember kids, you can't have a fair without a healthy dose of racial superiority. Even with indigenous mud throwing contests being the crowd drawers they are, they didn't want to have to compete for spectators. So they threatened to overshadow the Olympics with their own sporting events, and successfully moved the Olympics to St. Louis.
Bro, you fucking kidding me? But Chicago had the World's Fair at one point, didn't it? Fuck you, St. Louis. Chicago should have gotten it. Chicago would have made it good. Look at that city. Chicago, beautiful city.
The first debacle in the cluster
Fucking way. I would say Chicago's probably top 10 in the U.S. to host the Olympics. Back then, not so much anymore. Today, I don't want to deal with that because living in the suburbs near the city, I just know it would also the chaos of the Olympic Games would also stretch out to the suburbs, and I don't want that. I've read the like articles and seen videos and stuff of what happens to the cities that like have that host the Olympic Games. You don't want to host the Olympic Games anymore. It's too fucking expensive. It's detrimental and also terrible for the environment nowadays.
Fuck that was the 1904 Olympics was the issue of location. With them lazy Wright boys not having double-decker Boeing 747s out yet, for foreign athletes, getting to St. Louis involved a lengthy boat trip, followed by a 1,000-mile train ride. Combined with the fact that the Russians and Japanese were having a disagreement at the time, a measly 12 nations showed up, with only 62 of the 651 athletes hailing from outside of North America. But the eye of the storm centered on the iconic marathon event.
Okay, so what he is not mentioning also, like at this time, and really I think it was until, I want to say it wasn't until after World War II when it changed, because I think athletes, at least in the 1936 games, I think they also had to essentially find a way to, like, they weren't sponsored. They had to find a way to pay for their travel. I don't know if the 1936 games was actually when it changed. But especially here in these early Olympics, 1904, these people all had to pay for their own travel. I mean, I'm sure maybe some occasionally, maybe they were state sponsored. I don't know, but like that's why you see this huge difference here. 526 of them coming from the USA because, well, the Americans are able to afford it because it's within their own country, right? These guys can't, and that's also why you see Canada here able to have more than the others, because again, Canada is right next to the USA, right?
Event. The 1904 Olympic Marathon was more freak show than showpiece, ironically more fitting for the fair-like atmosphere than a prestigious sporting event. Instead of the typical morning start time, this one was held in the afternoon, where temperatures soared to 92 degrees Fahrenheit, with humidity in the 90s. This means the race took place with a heat index of a scorching 135 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, ideal marathon conditions are around 41 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like replacing your CPU cooler with a tungsten arc welding torch. Only 32 runners from 4 nations participated in the race. A few were experienced runners, having won or placed in past marathons, but the majority were misfits. Of these misfits, we have 2 South African Tswana tribesmen visiting St. Louis for a certain World's Fair exhibit, who ran the race barefoot. 10 Greeks who had never run a marathon a day in their lives, and Cuban national Felix Carbajal, a former mailman who demonstrated his running skills throughout Cuba to raise money. He was even reported to have ran the entire span of the island. Once he raised enough, he bought passage to the US and arrived in New Orleans. What's this quaint little contest? Dice. 1 in? Oh, well, I suppose I could spare $1 or 2.
Dame los dados.
Upon arrival, Felix lost all of his money on a game of dice, forcing him to hitchhike and walk his remaining journey to St. Louis. Felix approached the starting line in a long-sleeve shirt, long dark pants, street shoes, and, naturally, a beret. Hey, when you're 5 feet tall and amongst marathoners and all their short shorts thigh glisten in glory, you have to stand out somehow. A fellow Olympian felt bad and offered him scissors to cut his pants, making him some improvised shorts that bring a smile to any redneck's face. The starting pistol was fired, and the runners embarked on a course that one official called, quote, the most difficult a human being was ever asked to run over. The track consisted entirely of dirt roads and fractured stone, providing difficult footing.
I think this is the Olympics that I am thinking of. Yep.
7 hills ranging from 100 to 300 foot verticals and long ascents. Running on public roads also made the race somewhat of a game of Frogger, with runners having to dodge trains, wagons, streetcars, and dog walkers. Not even the air was safe, with cars driving alongside the runners, kicking up dust for them to inhale. Uphill running, dusty mouth, scorching heat. I could really go for some water.
What? Water? What are you, a pussy?
Meet James Sullivan, chief organizer of the Olympic Games. One day, James pondered a question we all have from time to time. What would happen if I forcibly dehydrated someone? To study the effects of purposeful dehydration, James decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, planning a marathon with only a single water station on the course. A dirty well, 11 miles in, that gave you dysentery. At the start of the race, Fred Lorse took the lead, with Thomas Hicks passing him shortly after. One of the barefoot South Africans was chased a mile off course by wild dogs. John Lauren began vomiting profusely and gave up. William Garcia was found collapsed and on the brink of death after coughing up blood in the middle of the track, hemorrhaging with a ripped stomach lining and dust-lined esophagus.
This is the one I'm thinking of. Yep.
Interesting. Meanwhile, Felix was actually making good time, despite pausing to talk to every spectator along the track. During the race, Felix casually remembered he hadn't eaten in the past 40 hours. He then saw people in a car with some peaches and asked for one, to which they said no.
Hey, the fuck?
Later on in the race, he stumbled upon an orchard and ate some apples, which then turned out to be rotten. He then started cramping and vomiting, so he decided to lay down and take a nap. Despite all odds and setbacks, Felix would actually go on to finish 4th. 9 miles in, Fred Lors called it quits after cramping up, hitching a ride to the finish line and waving at bystanders and runners as he passed. Thomas Hicks started to show signs of extreme exhaustion 10 miles in, and begged his coach for water. But his coach, believing the only people who ever needed water were Aquaman and pussies, settled for sponging his mouth out with some warm distilled water. Hicks really started to break down 7 miles from the finish, which is where Dr. Charles Lucas sprung into action, giving him a mixture of strychnine and egg whites. Some call it a performance enhancer, some call it rat poison. I say it's 1904, so what's the difference? Keep in mind, early 20th century doctors were little more than licensed murderers. The car Fred Lors was hitching broke down 19 miles in. Having recovered from his cramps, he decided to pull a sneaky and rejoin the race, passing doped-up Hicks and later the finish line in first place. Those at the stadium didn't know about Fred's disqualification, so they hailed him as the winner, and Fred played along. It even went so far that Teddy Roosevelt's daughter, Alice Roosevelt, took a picture with him and placed a wreath over his head. She was lowering the gold medal over his neck when a spectator stepped in. Hey, yeah, that guy was disqualified.
You saw. You're fucking disgraceful. Skinny
I love that it was Teddy Roosevelt's daughter that was the first one to shove him to the ground. Fucking respect.
Okay, so I may have made that part up. I have an imagination, sue me. The cheers turned to boos as Fred tried to play it off as a joke, claiming that he never intended to go through with it. Meanwhile, Hicks, who had lost motivation when Fred passed him, painfully picked up his pace after hearing of his disqualification. However, recently poisoned Hicks started to turn gray and limp, so they dosed him again with strychnine and egg whites.
No.
So you know how when you're watching the Olympics and think to yourself, these sports have a serious lack of alcoholism? Well, Hicks' team thought so too, so they washed the lethal drug down with some brandy. Why drink water when you can have ethanol? Hicks started running mechanically, like a well-oiled machine. His face sunk, his eyes grew dim, his palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. 20 miles in, Hicks started hallucinating, firmly believing he had another 20 miles to go. He begged his team for something to eat, but they just gave him more brandy instead. Poisoned and shit-faced, just like my 2 a.m. Taco Bell runs, Thomas Hicks swinged and shuffled his way over the final stretch, with his trainers carrying him across the finish line, where he received the gold medal. Only 14 of the original 32 runners finished the race, the worst finish ratio in Olympic history. Here's a graph of gold medal marathon times throughout history. And here's Hicks' time, a full 29 minutes and 8 seconds slower than the second longest winning time in history, and almost 45 minutes longer than the slowest finisher in the 2016 Olympic marathon. It took 1 hour and 4 doctors for Hicks to feel well enough to just even leave the stadium, having lost 8 pounds over the course of the race. So if Sullivan's experiment taught us anything, it's one hell of a weight loss program.
No.
So, in conclusion, while the 1904 Olympic Marathon featured the first 2 black Olympic athletes and a BlueJay approved amount of alcohol, it also resulted in multiple near fatalities and resembled less of an expertly organized event and more of an Ed, Ed, and Eddie scheme. 2 out of 10 stars.
How the fuck did no one die, though? Yeah, right, that was history's worst Olympic marathon in a nutshell. This was fun. Yeah, it's just like all BlueJay episodes. This is just me praising him. I love this channel. This was one of his older videos, but this is I think this is where we really start to see his style come in. Like the Chinese one was not I think someone said that may have been his first video where he started doing this stuff. And then I think this is really around the time when we start to see the so far we're starting to see a style come to fruition. So that's always that's one of the things I think is really cool to see. But that was history's worst Olympic marathon in a nutshell. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.